Now that your husband's gone, mourn if you need to, pack your things, and don't come back." Those were my daughter-in-law's words over dinner, and my son just nodded with that empty smile, like it was already settled. This house was never really yours anyway. I didn't say a word. I left that night. The next morning, I stopped by the bank, and the teller greeted me like nothing had changed. "Stay with me till the end and drop the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." Without Alton, the dining room felt hollow. That big old mahogany table where we used to squeeze in for holidays and birthdays suddenly looked too wide, too polished, too bare, even with 3 of us still sitting there. I kept looking at the chair he used to fill, expecting to catch that soft smile, hear his quiet breath. It had only been a week since we laid him to rest, a week since I stood at his grave, trying to understand how 32 years could vanish into a patch of dirt in silence. Grief clung to me like wet clothes, making every move feel slow and weighted. "Past the potatoes, murder," Celeste said, her voice sharp enough to leave a mark. She'd never been warm to me, but tonight her coldness came with an edge. My fingers shook as I reached for the bowl. The funeral had drained more from me than I'd imagined. At 71, I thought I was braced for this, but nothing readied me for the quiet ache that followed me into every room. Russell, 43, sat between us like a referee who already knew which side he was rooting for. He barely looked my way, eyes locked on his wife like he needed her permission to speak. The same boy who once crawled into my bed after nightmares couldn't even meet my eyes. "The service was beautiful, wasn't it?" I said, trying to smooth over the silence. "Your father would have loved seeing all those people." Celeste set her fork down, slow and deliberate. "Yes, well, that's actually what we need to talk to you about, Laverne." Her tone made my stomach tighten. I looked between them, hoping to find some warmth, some sense that we were still family. Instead, I saw strategy in her eyes and hesitation in my son's. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling in my gut. Celeste straightened her spine the way she always did when she was about to lay something down. Like law, I'd seen it before, when she explained why Russell couldn't come visit, why holidays had to be hosted her way, why things always had to bend around her. "Russell and I have been talking," she said, coating her voice with that fake concern she pulls out when she's about to take something. "Now that Alton is gone, this house is going to be too much for you." I blinked. Was she serious? Too much. "I've taken care of this place for over 30 years. I know every loose step, every leaking pipe." "Exactly," she said, that mask of politeness slipping just a bit. "You're getting older. A house this size is expensive to maintain. Russell and I think it's best if you moved somewhere more manageable." The words hit me like a slap. Move. This was my home. Alton and I built our life in these walls. Russell grew up here. Then finally, he spoke. Barely a whisper. "Mom, Celeste's right. The upkeep is going to get hard." "I'm not helpless, Russell," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "And this house, your father and I worked our whole lives for it. Every room in this place holds part of us." Celeste's expression stiffened. "Well, memories don't pay the electric bill or the property taxes. Be reasonable, Laverne." I looked straight at her. This woman who'd slowly cut me out of my own son's life for the past 15 years, the same woman who'd talked Russell into believing Sunday dinners with me were just too stressful, that holidays had to be fair, which always ended up meaning more time with her family. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, though I already felt the answer taking shape in the pit of my stomach like a block of ice. "We think you should consider one of those nice retirement communities," Celeste said, her voice dripping with the kind of cheer that barely hid the condescension. "A place with activities, people your age. It'd be so much better than knocking around this big, empty house by yourself." I turned to Russell, praying for some sign that he wasn't on board with this. "Russell, are you really saying I should sell the house you grew up in? The home, your father and I?" "It makes sense, Mom," he cut in, eyes still avoiding mine. "And honestly, Celeste and I could use the room. We've been talking about growing our family, and this place has so much potential." His words hit me like a wave of cold water. It wasn't just about pushing me out. They wanted the house. The one Alton and I poured ourselves into, room by room, over 30 years. Now that he's gone, I'm just supposed to grieve, pack, and disappear. Celeste's tone suddenly dropped. The act, no more fake kindness. The house was never really yours anyway. She let the Spanish word for father-in-law slip out like it meant nothing, like she was tossing out junk instead of dismissing her husband's mother from her own home. Russell looked up then. For a second, I saw something flicker. Doubt, maybe, even guilt. But then he smiled and nodded. She's right, Mom. This house was Dad's. Now it's mine. You were just living here. My whole world tilted. Just living here, like 32 years of marriage, of building a life and raising a child, boiled down to nothing more than squatting. I see, I said, somehow keeping my voice even. But inside, everything was shattering, not just my heart, but the way I thought I knew my own son, the way I thought I knew this family. I stood up, legs barely holding me. I'll need some time. 2 weeks, Celeste snapped. That should be enough to find a place and schedule movers. 2 weeks, not 2 months. Not even enough time to properly mourn and figure out my next step. Just 2 weeks to take apart a lifetime. Russell finally met my eyes, and what I saw there cut deeper than hate. It was indifference. Cold, blank indifference. It's for the best, Mom, he said like he needed to hear it more than I did. You'll see. I walked upstairs to the bedroom Alton, and I had shared, each step heavier than the last. The room still held the scent of his cologne. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand, right where he left them the night before his heart gave out. I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back seemed older than 71, her silver hair limp, her blue eyes hollowed by loss. In 2 weeks, I'd be forced to leave this room, the same one where I said goodbye to Alton just 7 days ago. I'd have to cram 32 years of marriage into boxes and hand the keys to a son who'd just told me I never truly belonged here. But as I sat there in the growing dark, something else began to rise under the grief. Beneath the shock, something, small and solid, was starting to form, a quiet, stubborn resolve. Alton had always been the one in charge of our money, but he'd taught me to be meticulous and not overlook the fine print. Starting tomorrow, I'd begin taking care of things. I was going to call the bank and start figuring out exactly what was mine, because if Russell and Celeste thought they could cut me out of this family without pushback, they were in for something else. Step 1 was to understand exactly what Alton had left behind and who it was meant for. The morning light looked different through the kitchen windows as I sat alone at the breakfast table. Halfway through my second cup of coffee, it had been 10 days since that awful dinner, and the house felt like it was just waiting for me to go. Russell and Celeste had already stopped by twice to size the place up, taking room measurements and talking about renovations like I wasn't even there. Yesterday, I'd heard Celeste on the phone with the contractor, lining up quotes for once the old woman moves out. I'd spent those 10 days in a fog, moving through the house on autopilot, sorting things out and trying to ignore the sick feeling that kept building in my gut. But this morning, I finally felt ready to take care of what Alton would have expected me to handle. The drive to Heritage State Bank took about 15 minutes, all through streets I'd known for decades. I'd made that drive with Alton for over 20 years. He'd go inside and deal with the money while I stayed in the car. He was always protective of our finances, not because he didn't trust me, but because he said it was just one less thing I needed to stress about. Now, I really wished I'd been more involved. Mrs. Mallory, the bank manager, greeted me with that measured sympathy people reserve for new widows. Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry to hear about Alton. He was such a gentleman, always asked about my grandkids. Thank you, Dottie. He always spoke kindly of you, too. I eased into the chair across from her desk, clutching my purse tight. In my lap, I need to understand where we stand financially. Alton handled it all, and I'm honestly not sure where to begin. Dottie gave a small nod, her face softening. Of course. Let me pull up your accounts. She turned to her screen, typing quickly. A few seconds later, her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh my, she said. My stomach dropped. Is something wrong? For a second, I thought Russell and Celeste might have already touched our accounts. Not wrong, no. Just more than I expected to find. Let's start with the joint checking account you and Alton used. She printed a statement and slid it over to me. The balance wasn't huge, but it was enough to get by for a good while if I stayed smart. I felt a wave of relief. At least I wasn't left with nothing. There's also a joint savings account, Dottie went on, handing me another paper. This time the number was much bigger, enough to keep me afloat for years if it came to that. That's wonderful, I said, my shoulders relaxing a little. Alton always made sure we saved. Yes, Dottie said, though she was still frowning at her monitor. Very organized. But, Mrs. Henderson, I'm seeing a few more accounts that need clarification. Some of them are in your name alone. When's the last time you reviewed everything with Alton? In my name, I said, confused. That doesn't make sense. Alton managed all of it. Dottie kept typing, her eyes scanning the screen. Looks like there are 4 more accounts. 2 CDs, 1 money market, and, this is interesting, a trust account set up 5 years ago. My head was spinning. I don't get it, I said. Alton never told me about any of this. Did your husband ever say anything about your family situation? Sometimes clients set up separate accounts to protect themselves. The question hit me sideways. Protect themselves from what? I don't follow. Dottie paused, clearly weighing her words. When people have complicated family situations, maybe worries over inheritance issues or outside pressure, they sometimes take extra steps to make sure their spouse is financially secure. I thought back on how Alton had acted these past few years, how he started getting curious about Celeste's shopping habits, how he'd go silent anytime Russell brought up money problems, how he insisted on managing all the banking alone, never letting Russell go with him, even when our son offered. What about these other accounts? I asked, my voice just above a whisper. Dottie pulled more pages from the printer. The first CD had been renewing every year for 7 years. The second one was opened 3 years ago. The money market account had been slowly collecting transfers from our joint checking. Small ones, $50 here, $50 there, but it added up. She passed me the printouts. The numbers blurred on the page. These weren't small rainy day funds. This was serious money. Enough to buy a house. Enough to live well for years. How could this be? I never signed off on anything. I never, actually. You did, Dottie said, her tone gentle as she reached for a folder. Your name's on every document. Looks like Alton brought you in to sign them. Probably told you it was just routine banking or insurance paperwork. I looked at the form she handed me. There was my signature. Dated, witnessed. I didn't remember signing it, but the dates stood out. 1 was the day we came in to update our address after the house numbers changed. Another, when we switched to a new checking account. He never said what I was really signing. I whispered, it happens, Dottie said carefully. Some spouses keep the details to themselves to avoid upsetting their partner. And legally, everything checks out. These accounts are in your name. I tried to wrap my head around it, while Russell and Celeste were measuring my kitchen and talking about remodeling, treating me like something to get rid of. I had money they didn't even know existed. There's something else, Dottie added, her voice softer now. That trust account I mentioned, it's been getting transfers from a business account for the last 5 years, the Henderson Construction Trust. That was your husband's company, right? Yes, but Alton sold it when he retired. Russell said the sale barely covered the debts. Dottie looked at her screen again. According to our system, that business account is still open. There have been regular deposits, followed by transfers into your trust. Mrs. Henderson, I think it's time you spoke with the company's accountant. There's more here than you realize. I walked out of the bank in a fog, my purse stuffed with documents and printouts. Instead of heading home, I pulled into a cafe parking lot and sat in the car, going over everything Dottie had handed me. The numbers were clear. Without ever saying a word, Alton had spent years making sure I'd be okay. Every account, every investment, every trust had been built to keep me standing on my own. And as I read through the trust statements, a pattern began to form. The deposits lined up with each of Russell's visits over the last 5 years. Bigger sums always followed those times he'd asked his dad for a little money, or when Celeste had brought up their money troubles. Turns out, Alton had been giving our son cash, but he'd also been setting aside an equal, maybe even larger, amount for me, like he knew I might need to stand on my own one day. My phone buzzed with a message from Russell. Mom, Celeste found a realtor to list the house. We can start showing it next week. Hope you're making progress on finding a place. I stared at the text, then glanced back at the bank statements sitting in my lap. Russell and Celeste were so sure of themselves, so convinced they were in control. They didn't realize the plans they'd made were built on something they didn't fully grasp. Tomorrow, I'd call the business accountant. I needed to know exactly what else Alton had left behind. And then I'd figure out what to do with the fact that my husband had loved me enough to make sure I'd never have to rely on anyone. The grief was still there, raw, constant, but under it, something new had started to grow. A quiet strength I hadn't felt in a long time. The Holloway and Associates accounting office was tucked in a modest strip mall between a dry cleaner and a place that did taxes. I'd never been there before. Alton had always taken care of those meetings himself, saying it was all dry paperwork and would only give me a headache. Now I realized he hadn't just been shielding me from boredom. Janice Holloway looked to be around my age, hair gone silver and pulled into a no-nonsense bun, kind eyes behind thin glasses. She'd been handling Henderson Construction's books for more than 15 years, and when I called her yesterday, her tone had been polite but cautious. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, gesturing toward the chair across from her paper-stacked desk. "First off, I'm sorry for your loss. Alton was a good man. Straightforward. I'm going to miss our quarterly check-ins. Thank you." "I wish I'd known that side of him, as well as you did," I said, settling in with the bank statements tucked in my purse. "I'm trying to make sense of where we stand financially." The bank mentioned ongoing business income I didn't know existed. Janice's brows lifted a little. "You didn't know? That's unusual. Alton talked about you often, I assumed." She paused, choosing her words more carefully. "Please, I really need to understand," I said. "My son told me the business was sold years ago, that it barely covered the debts." "Sold?" Janice looked genuinely puzzled. "No, Mrs. Henderson Construction wasn't sold. It was restructured." She turned to her computer and started scrolling through files. 5 years back, Alton moved all company assets into a trust. The Henderson Construction Trust. You're listed as the main beneficiary. The room seemed to shift beneath me. "I'm the owner of the construction company. Technically, the trust owns it. But yes, you own the trust. It's actually been doing well. Your husband was selective about the contracts he took on after the change. Smaller gigs, dependable clients, consistent cash flow. That's what kept things stable, instead of riding the highs and lows of bigger commercial jobs." She handed me a few printed pages. "These are the profit and loss records from the last 5 years. The company's been pulling in steady money." I looked at the figures, my hands starting to shake. The yearly profits were solid, more than enough to explain the regular deposits I'd seen in the trust account. But Alton had retired. I said he wasn't working. He'd stepped away from the daily grind. He had, but he still kept an eye on things, made the big picture calls. The actual building work's been in Tom Kendrick's hands. "You know him, right?" I nodded. Tom had worked under Alton for over 2 decades, started as a kid learning the ropes and eventually became foreman. He was at the funeral, one of the few who looked truly heartbroken. "Tom's basically been running things these past 5 years, Janice went on. "Alton set it up so Tom earned a cut of the profits as a bonus. That setup kept him loyal, driven. It worked really well. Why didn't Alton tell me any of this?" I barely got the words out. Janice hesitated, clearly uneasy. "Mrs. Henderson, maybe it's not my place to say, but Alton was worried about family pressure. He knew your son was having money problems, and that his wife had a taste for the expensive. He thought if the family knew about the business still bringing in money, there'd be expectations, demands, that could put your financial future at risk." The truth was clicking into place, painfully and fast. Every time Russell asked his dad for help, every time Celeste hinted at how comfortable we seemed, Alton had been weighing how to support our son without putting my future on the line. "He was looking out for me," I said, the words thick with understanding. "He was protecting both of you, just in different ways," Janice replied quietly. "The loans he gave Russell were sizable, but they came out of the business account, not your personal funds, and he made sure to handle it all by the book." She pulled out another folder. "These are all the loan agreements between the company and your son. Alton treated them like legit business deals, with payment plans and interest." I opened the folder, hands unsteady, and flipped through page after page of signed loan contracts. Alton and Russell's names on every one. The totals were staggering, tens of thousands over 5 years, allegedly, for Russell's business ideas and investments. "Has Russell paid anything back?" I asked, though I already knew. Janice's face tightened. "He's way behind on payments, as of last month, with interest. He owes around $87,000. The number hit like a punch to the gut. Russell owed the company. My company, almost 90 grand. And yet he'd been acting like Alton left behind nothing but bills. What happens with these loan obligations now? I asked. They go with the business assets, she said. As the new trustee, you can demand repayment or change the terms however you want. I pictured Russell and Celeste pacing through my kitchen, talking renovations, trying to decide when they could start showing the place. They acted like they had it all locked in, like they'd earned the right to take over everything Alton worked for. Then Janice's tone shifted. There's something else you should know, she said, a little more careful now. Your son reached out to me last month, said, with his father gone, he'd be taking charge of the business, asked me to draw up documents to transfer ownership. I told him I couldn't do anything without signed authorization from the beneficiary, from you. He was thrown. It was like he hadn't considered you might be involved at all, like I was too broken to notice what they were doing. That kind of betrayal hits harder than you expect. I need to ask you something off the record, I said. If I wanted to keep the business structure the way it is, with Tom still running the day-to-day, can we make that work? Absolutely. He's been hoping you'd reach out. He's worried about the business and his job. If you're open to keeping things steady, he'll show up for you. He'll be dependable. I gathered the paperwork, my thoughts racing. The business belonged to me. The debt Russell ran up was real, enforceable, and they had no clue the whole future they'd planned was built on guesses and wishful thinking. I want to meet with Tom as soon as possible, I said, and I need to understand all the options I have for handling those loans. Of course, should I give him a call this afternoon? Yes, please. And Janice, keep this between us for now. Of course, confidentiality is everything in this line of work. On the way home, my phone buzzed with another text from Celeste. Laverne, the realtor's booking a photographer for tomorrow. Make sure the house looks clean and staged. First impressions count with buyers. I stared at that message, then slipped the phone back into my purse without answering. Let them schedule their shoot. Let them dream about decorating rooms they thought they'd inherited. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already starting to break. That night, I sat in Alton's study for the first time since he died, surrounded by the files he'd kept so neatly. Now I saw why he'd been so strict about the paperwork. Every form, every receipt, it was all protection. He'd built a wall around me, piece by piece, every decision a layer of defense. Tomorrow, I'd start finding out just how solid it really was. The next morning, Tom Kendrick sat across from me in the kitchen, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. At 55, he still had the wide frame and rough hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with tools and steel. But there was something new in his eyes, a kind of guarded look I hadn't seen before. Mrs. Henderson, I'm gonna be straight with you, he said, voice gravelly, weighed down. I've been anxious ever since Mr. Alton passed. Russell stopped by the site last week, talking about reviewing assets and tightening things up. Didn't sound too promising for folks like me. I topped off my coffee, the motion something I knew by heart, something that kept my hand steady. Tom, what exactly did my son say to you? He said the family was in a rough spot financially, that hard choices were coming down the line, and they'd have to reevaluate the business. He asked me to pull together a full list of contracts, our equipment, and cash flow forecasts. Tom's jaw clenched. He also asked for the keys to the equipment yard and the office. And how did you respond? I told him I'd need to speak to whoever's actually in charge now. Mr. Alton always told me that if anything happened, I was to wait on clear direction from the legal owner. He looked right at me. He never said it would be Russell. Relief surged through me. Alton had planned for this, had trusted Tom to hold the line, instead of just handing things over to whoever showed up first. Tom, I need to tell you something, but I need your word this stays between us for now. His face went solemn. You have it, ma'am. I laid out the documents Janice had brought over yesterday. I own Henderson Construction. Not Russell, not the estate. Me. Alton moved everything into a trust 5 years ago, and I'm the named beneficiary. Tom stared at the pages, his eyes widening. Well, I'll be damned. Pardon my language, ma'am. But Mr. Alton, he always did think 10 steps ahead. He did, I said. And according to the records, the company's been doing well. Under your leadership, a flicker of pride crossed his face. We've earned a solid name, Mrs. Henderson. Reliable clients, solid craftsmanship, honest pricing. Mr. Alton always said keeping loyal customers was more valuable than chasing big, one-off jobs. I want you to keep running things exactly as you have, I said. but I need to get a clearer picture. Russell hasn't been completely straight with me about our financials. Has he ever brought anything up with you that seemed off? Tom's face tightened. There's been a few things over the years. He'd drop by when Mr. Alton wasn't around, asking questions about incoming payments, what kind of cash was coming in. Once or twice, he hinted maybe the business could front him some money for investments. He said, "What did you tell him?" That he needed to run it by his father. I'm not naive, Mrs. Henderson. I knew what he was fishing for. Tom's tone sharpened. Last year, he actually showed up at the bank the same day we deposited a big check from the Holloway job, claimed it was just a coincidence. But he sure took an interest in chatting up the teller about that deposit. My stomach turned. Russell had been tracking the company's earnings, probably timing his money asks to match when the cash flow peaked. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I want the truth. Do you think Russell really gets how much money has run through this business? Tom sat there in silence for a beat, thinking it through. I think he knows it's more than your family ever let on, but I doubt he knows the whole picture. Mr. Alton kept business and personal money separate, at least on paper he did. What are you saying? Your husband was clever about it. When Russell came around needing help, Mr. Alton would tell him the business was tight, that things were tough, but he'd still come up with the money, usually from the business account, not his personal one. Tom took out his old notebook, the edges worn down from years of use. I log everything, Mrs. Henderson. That's something Mr. Alton drilled into me. From what I've got, Russell's gotten around $93,000 over the last 5 years. That number was even bigger than what Janice had shown me. Payments, not loans. That's the thing. Mr. Alton was sharp. On paper, it was all loans, full payment schedules and the works. But he never actually made Russell stick to any of it. Russell would skip a payment, and Mr. Alton just let it go. So Russell walks around thinking he's in the clear. Russell acts like he doesn't owe a thing, Tom said. Whether he really believes that or just pretends to, I don't know. Almost on cue, I heard a car door slam out front. Through the kitchen window, I saw Russell's Honda Pilot pulled up behind Tom's truck. That's my son, I said quietly. I don't want him knowing. We've been discussing business. Tom nodded and quickly stacked up the papers I'd shown him. Mrs. Henderson, whatever you choose to do, I'm behind you. Mr. Alton was a good man, and he trusted you enough to put it all in your name. That's all I need to know. Russell walked in without knocking, something that used to get under Alton's skin, but I'd long since stopped fighting it. Morning, Mom, he said, barely glancing at Tom. Didn't know you had company. Tom just dropped by to check in on me. I said easily, you know how thoughtful he is, right? Russell said, already scanning the kitchen like he was sizing it up for a listing. Actually, Tom, good timing. We need to talk about the business. Tom's face went blank. Well, now that Dad's gone, things are going to change. The family's got to make some smart calls about what to keep, what to move on from. I watched him, fascinated. Russell was so sure of himself, so sure of where he stood. He didn't even realize he was trying to lay claim to something that was never his to begin with. What kind of changes? Tom asked. We need to look at whether it makes sense to keep the business going or if it's better to sell off the assets and pay the debts. Russell replied, like he was talking about what to grab for lunch. I see, and who's making those calls? Tom said. Russell blinked, clearly caught off guard. The family, obviously. I'll be taking over Dad's business stuff from here. Will you now? Tom kept his voice even, but I heard the way he hit the word you. Mom, maybe make some fresh coffee, Russell said, brushing me off the way he always did when the grown-up talked. But he'd still come up with the money, usually from the business account, not his personal one. Tom took out his old notebook, the edges worn down from years of use. I log everything, Mrs. Henderson. That's something Mr. Alton drilled into me. From what I've got, Russell's gotten around $93,000 over the last 5 years. That number was even bigger than what Janice had shown me. Payments, not loans. That's the thing. Mr. Alton was sharp. On paper, it was all loans, full payment schedules and the works. Who should I go through to get authorization? With me, obviously. Russell's confidence flickered just a bit. And you're legally cleared to access Henderson Construction's accounts because I'm Alton Henderson's son and heir. I see. And do you have paperwork showing that you're authorized to act on behalf of the company? The kitchen went still, the only sound coming from the old clock ticking above the sink. Russell started turning red, caught somewhere between pissed off and unsure. Look, Tom, maybe you don't fully get what's going on here, he said, slipping into that patronizing tone he used whenever he felt cornered. This isn't some kind of corporate coup. I'm trying to sort out Dad's affairs and make sure everyone's taken care of, but I can't do that if you're going to throw up roadblocks. I'm not trying to be difficult, Tom said evenly. I'm just trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be taking instructions from. Your dad was always real specific about following proper channels. Russell turned to me, expecting backup. Mom, tell Tom I'm the one in charge of Dad's business now. I looked at my son, the man getting ready to sell my house from under me, the man who'd racked up almost 90 grand in debt while claiming his father left nothing behind, and made my choice. Actually, Russell, I think Tom's right to ask for documentation, I said quietly. Your father never did anything without making sure it was by the book. Russell stared at me like I'd suddenly gone crazy. What are you talking about? I'm talking about doing this the right way, legally. You can understand why that matters. For the first time since the conversation started, Russell looked unsure. And seeing that doubt on his face, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. The phone rang at 7 in the morning, 3 days after that scene in the kitchen. I've been waiting for it. When you challenge someone who's used to getting their way, you better expect a reaction. Mom, we need to talk, now. Russell's voice was tight, barely holding back his temper. Celeste and I are coming over. It's kind of early, don't you think? This can't wait. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could answer. I didn't rush. I picked out a navy dress. Alton always said it, made me look dignified. If there was going to be a showdown, I was going to be ready for it. They showed up exactly 20 minutes later, Celeste's heels pounding the porch like she was making a statement. I opened the door before they could knock, keeping the upper hand that came with being the one who lived here. Morning, I said, sounding friendly enough to pass for polite company. Celeste brushed past me into the living room, her designer bag held tight against her like it could do damage. Russell trailed behind, jaw set, looking like he was walking into a standoff. They stayed on their feet, standing right between me and the exit. Classic pressure move. Mom, I don't know what kind of game you think this is, Russell started, his tone sharp. But Tom Kendrick called yesterday and said he couldn't give me any business info without the right authorization. What did you tell him? I sat down, in Alton's favorite chair, the one that let you see everything from the best angle. I told him to stick to the rules. Your dad would have expected that. The rules, Celeste's voice cracked, climbing in pitch. Russell is Alton's rightful heir. What other permission does anyone need? Legal permission, I said, keeping my voice even. The kind that comes with actual ownership. Russell's eyes locked on mine. What are you saying? Dad's will says everything goes to the family. I'm the executor. That means I manage all the assets until probate is complete. And actually, Russell, that's not exactly right. I reached for the folder I'd set on the table, the one with all the paperwork Janice Holloway had handed me. When I opened it, both of them stiffened. Your father's will does leave his personal things and the house to the family, I went on. But Henderson Construction isn't included in his estate. It hasn't been for years. What are you talking about? Russell snapped. I laid the trust documents down on the coffee table. Henderson Construction has belonged to the Henderson Construction Trust since 2019. I'm the only named beneficiary. The silence was loud. Celeste grabbed the papers. First, her perfectly done nails trembling while she tried to make sense of the legal terms. Russell leaned over to read with her, color draining from his face. This can't be, Celeste murmured. You don't know the first thing about running a business. You couldn't even balance a checkbook. You're right, I didn't. Your father took care of all of that. But apparently he saw things in this family I was too blind to notice. Russell dropped onto the couch like someone had kicked his legs out. But the business was struggling. Dad always said the margins were razor thin, that we were barely making it month to month. Actually, the business has been doing quite well. Here are the financial records from the last 5 years. I handed him another stack of paperwork. Watching Russell take it all in was like watching someone suddenly realize they'd been playing the wrong game the whole time, thinking it was checkers when it had been chess all along. These profits, Russell's voice was barely there. Where did the money go? Some of it went to you, Russell. A good chunk, actually. I slid over the loan documents. $87,000 over 5 years, to be exact. Celeste snatched them up, flipping through the pages, her eyes moving fast. These say loans. Russell, you told me these were gifts. You said your dad was helping us get, but his voice wavered. Dad never asked us to pay anything back. He never mentioned repayment schedules. Actually, he did, I said, keeping my tone low. Janice Holloway kept records of every call, every missed payment, every time your father chose to stretch the terms instead of pushing you for what you owed. I could see the truth settling in for them, heavy and slow. Russell had built his whole financial setup on the idea that his father would always be there to bail him out. He'd probably made promises, spent money he didn't have, based on what he thought he could count on. But that doesn't change anything, Celeste said suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. The house still goes to Russell. That's worth way more than some little construction business. Is it? I said, steady. Celeste's face tightened, caught somewhere between rage and fear. Don't mess around, Laverne. This house is worth at least $400,000. You're right, it's a beautiful place. But there is the mortgage. Russell's head jerked up. What mortgage? Dad said it was paid off. It was then, about a year and a half ago. He took out a home equity loan, a big one. I pulled out the last folder, just found it yesterday in Noel's study, carefully filed under emergency funds, a home equity loan for $350,000. I went on. The money went straight into the Henderson Construction Trust account, which means it became part of my inheritance. Celeste's face drained of color. That's not possible. We would have known. We would have had to sign something. Your dad was the only legal owner when he signed for the loan, I said. I had survivorship rights as his spouse, but I wasn't listed as a co-owner. He didn't need anyone else's signature. Russell kept staring at the paperwork like it was written in code. But why would he do that? Why mortgage the house just to fund the business account? And for the first time since we started talking, I let my feelings show. Because he was looking out for me, Russell. He wanted to make sure that no matter how things turned out, I'd be financially okay. Looking out for you from what? Russell's voice was raw. From this, I said, motioning at the mess in front of me. From being shoved out of my own house by people in my own family who saw me as a burden, not a person. From being left with nothing while everyone else scrambled for whatever they thought they were owed. Celeste's calm finally gave out. You played him. You talked a dying man into flipping everything. Your father wasn't dying when he set up those trusts. Celeste, he was thinking ahead, and the fact that he felt the need to think ahead should say a lot about how he saw this family. Russell's hands trembled as he dropped the papers. Mom, come on, we can figure something out. You don't actually want to run a construction company. And the house, this house, it's where we grew up. It belongs in the family. It is staying in the family, Russell. It's staying with me. But the mortgage, Celeste said, her voice tightening. How are you going to cover the mortgage? The way your father set it up, with the income from Henderson Construction. Tom Kendrick told me the company's stable, and Janice Holloway says the cash flow easily handles the loan payments and leaves more than enough for me to live on. I stood up, smoothed my dress. Now, didn't you say something about moving out? I still think that's a great idea. Not for me, obviously, but I'm sure you'll find a nice place to start over. Russell stared at me like I was someone he'd never met. Mom, you're not serious. After everything Dad did for you, after what our family means, your father did do everything for me. I cut in. He loved me enough to make sure I wouldn't have to depend on anyone, not even my own sons. And now I see exactly how much I needed that. Celeste was already at the door, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. This isn't finished. We're not done. We're going to fight this. We're going to contest all of it. You're welcome to try, I said without raising my voice. But you should know your father handled it all by the book. Every piece of it is legally sound and fully documented. Janice Holloway is nothing if not thorough, and she's already given my lawyer everything he needs. Russell hesitated at the door, his face caught somewhere between shock and heartbreak. I don't get it, Mom. Why are you doing this to us? I'm not doing anything to you, Russell. I'm just not letting you do it to me. After they were gone, I sat alone in the stillness of my house, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. For the first time since I was a girl, I was completely free, financially. I didn't owe anybody anything, and no one could take away what I had. Alton had given me more than just money. He'd given me freedom. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my new cottage by the ocean, watching the sun streak the Pacific with gold. The sound of the waves, crashing against the rocks, had become my daily music, replacing the creaks and sighs of the old place. The cottage in Rockport was smaller than the family home, but every inch of it was mine. Every chair, every painting, every room was shaped by my taste, not by compromise, not by marriage. And it turned out, surprisingly, I had great taste when no one else was weighing in. Henderson Construction kept doing well with Tom Kendrick in charge. He called me every Friday afternoon to give updates on current jobs and upcoming contracts, and the quarterly profits went straight into my account. I'd stuck to my word to run the business just like Alton set it up, and it looked like everyone appreciated the steady hand. The cottage came out of nowhere. While digging into real estate along the Maine coast, I found out Alton had bought it 3 years ago through the construction trust. Janice Holloway came across the deed while sorting through company assets, along with a note in Alton's handwriting that said it was for Laverne's retirement when she was ready for sea air and a life without clocks. Even after he was gone, my husband was still looking out for me. But this morning was different. My lawyer was stopping by to wrap up the last bit of business from the life I used to have. Russell and Celeste had actually tried to fight the trust, hiring some high-priced lawyer who focused on elder law and financial abuse. It didn't go their way. The investigation confirmed everything Alton set up was fully legal and properly handled, and it also uncovered that Russell owed the business more money than we originally thought. With interest and penalties, the total climbed to just over $96,000. The doorbell rang right at 10. Bruce Mallory, not related to Dottie at the bank, was a punctual man who believed being on time said a lot about a person. He'd been my attorney since the whole thing started, and his steady, no-nonsense approach had helped get me through the worst of it. "Good morning, Laverne," he said as he sat in his usual chair by the window. "I've got the final settlement agreement for you to look over." I poured coffee from the French press I'd learned to use, one of the small freedoms in this new chapter, and took a seat across from him. How'd they take the final terms? Bruce looked like he was holding back a smirk. Russell's lawyer had spent a good chunk of time arguing that family should come before business. But at the end of the day, the law is pretty firm when it comes to money owed. He handed me the documents. After 6 months of back and forth, Russell and Celeste had signed off on a deal that admitted the full debt and set up a payment plan that would take 8 years to pay off, assuming they never missed a payment. They made one last attempt to sneak in a forgiveness clause. Bruce went on. Russell actually broke down during the last meeting, saying I was wrecking my relationship with my only son over cash. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them I represent your financial interests, not your family dynamics," Bruce said, though I may have added that most mothers don't need to sue their kids to collect what they're owed. There was one part of the deal that gave me real peace of mind. If Russell and Celeste ever missed the payment, the business had the right to garnish Russell's wages and place liens on anything they bought. It was a solid backup plan to make sure I'd get paid, no matter what they did with their money down the line. "There's something else," Bruce said, pulling out another envelope. "This came for you yesterday." The handwriting on the front was Russell's. Inside was a short note on plain paper. "Mom, I know you probably won't forgive me for pushing back the way I did, but I wanted you to know I finally get why Dad did what he did. I had to lose almost everything before I could see how much I took for granted. Celeste and I are in marriage counseling, and I've picked up a second job to stay on top of the payment plan. I hope one day you'll be open to talking to me again. I'm sorry for all of it. Russell." I folded the note carefully and set it aside. The apology felt real. I didn't doubt that, but it was 6 months too late and came more from consequences than any real change of heart. "Do you want me to reply?" Bruce asked. "No. If Russell wants to fix things with me, he can do it the same way he's paying down that debt, slowly, steadily, and with effort." After Bruce left, I took my coffee out onto the deck and read the letter again. The grief hadn't gone anywhere, not just for Alton, but for the son I thought I'd raised, and the family I believed in. But underneath all that sadness was something sharper, a quiet, steady sense of pride that I hadn't backed down when it counted. My phone rang, cutting through the moment. The number wasn't familiar, but something about it felt like I should know it. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson. This is Sherry Holloway, Janice's daughter." "Of course, Sherry. What can I do for you?" "I hope it's okay that I called. Mom told me a bit about what you've been through. How you had to start over after ... Well, after things got rough with your family. I'm putting together a support group for women who've gone through financial abuse by relatives. I was wondering if you might be open to sharing your story." I didn't answer right away. I don't know what I'd even say. You'd be surprised how many women are dealing with the same thing. Adult kids who think they're owed everything. Husbands keeping money. If Russell and Celeste ever missed the payment, the business had the right to garnish Russell's wages and place liens on anything they bought. It was a solid backup plan to make sure I'd get paid, no matter what they did with their money down the line. There's something else, Bruce said, pulling out another envelope. This came for you yesterday. The handwriting on the front was Russell's. Inside was a short note on plain paper. Mom, I know you probably won't forgive me for pushing back the way I did, but I wanted you to know I finally get why Dad did what he did. I had to lose almost everything before I could see how much I took for granted. Celeste and I are in marriage counseling, and I've picked up a second job to stay on top of the payment plan. I hope one day you'll be open to talking to me again. I'm sorry for all of it, Russell. I folded the note carefully and set it aside. The apology felt real. I didn't doubt that, but it was 6 months too late and came more from consequences than any real change of heart. Do you want me to reply? Bruce asked. No. If Russell wants to fix things with me, he can do it the same way he's paying down that debt, slowly, steadily, and with effort. After Bruce left, I took my coffee out onto the deck and read the letter again. The grief hadn't gone anywhere, not just for Alton, but for the son I thought I'd raised, and the family I believed in. But underneath all that sadness was something sharper, a quiet, steady sense of tomorrow. I'd pull a few weeds in the garden, or maybe head into town for lunch at that small bistro where the owner always held my favorite table by the window. Those little comforts were mine now, and no one else got a say. Russell's debt would be handled in time, whether he straightened up or the business ended up taking it from his paycheck. The settlement made sure there'd be justice either way. But that wasn't the real win. The real win was knowing I had finally stood up and claimed the respect I should have had all along. As the sky let go of the last bit of light, I lifted my glass in a quiet toast to Alton, wherever he might be. He'd loved me enough to make sure I'd never be powerless again, never forced to count on people who saw me as disposable. He'd loved me enough to make sure that when the time came, I'd be ready. The ocean kept murmuring to the shore, and I sat there in my house, on my deck, in my life, finally clear on what freedom really was. It was never again having to ask for a seat at a table I should have been welcome at from the start. It was peace. They said the ocean heals, but they never tell you how slow it moves, how some mornings you wake up thinking the pain's finally behind you, only to have it wash back in with the tide. But healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering, without losing your breath. A year's passed since I signed the final settlement. 12 months since Russell stood in my living room, mouth slack, staring at the truth like it had walked in wearing my shoes. I gave him everything he needed to understand what his father left behind, not just the money, not just the house, but the values he forgot how to live by. And then I walked away. The cottage in Rockport's mine now in a way nothing ever truly was. Alton bought it for my retirement, tucked into that trust like a secret gift waiting for the right moment. He always said I'd come into my own when the world quieted down, when I didn't have to tend to everyone else's needs before my own. I used to think that was sweet. Now I know it was a warning. Mornings here start slow. I brew my coffee in silence, windows cracked to the salt air, and I let the stillness fill me instead of fearing it. The sea's not just background noise anymore. It's a reminder that things change, and that change can be steady, endless, and strong. Tom Kendrick still runs Henderson Construction. He calls every Friday, just like Alton used to. Gives me the numbers straight, no fluff. We've hired a young accountant from Boston who handles the tech side of things and helps us prep for retirement transitions in 10, 15 years. The company's growing, but carefully. My name's not just on the checks, it's on the contracts, the payroll, the tax forms. I'm not just a beneficiary, I'm the boss. Sometimes I visit job sites, I walk through gravel lots in clean shoes, listen to men in hard hats shout measurements and talk timelines. They nod when they see me. Some with respect, some with curiosity, none with pity. That part matters. I didn't become a public speaker on purpose. But when Sherry Holloway asked me to talk about elder financial abuse, I said yes. I told my story without shame, how I trusted my son, how I got edged out, how I fought back not with yelling or threats, but with paperwork, lawyers, and quiet resolve. And the room, full of women who looked like me, they sat straighter. Some wiped their eyes, One woman asked if I'd help her look over her late husband's estate plan. I did. It's not revenge I'm after anymore. It's awareness, power, not the kind that shows up in someone else's approval, but the kind that sits inside you when you finally know your worth. Russell writes every month. I haven't answered yet. His letters are less defensive now, less about excuses. He sends photos of the boys, my grandsons. They're taller. One plays trumpet, the other draws robots. He says they ask about me. I believe that. Kids don't hold grudges the way adults do. I keep the letters in a drawer next to Alton's glasses. Not out of nostalgia, but because when I finally decide to write back, I want to be sure I mean it. No half-hearted reunions. No apologies made for my success. If he wants to know me now, he'll have to meet me where I stand, not where I used to kneel. Last week, I replaced the deck railing myself. Found the wood at a salvage yard, brought it home, sanded and sealed it. Took 3 days. My arms ached, but when I stood back and saw it, sun-warmed, clean, level, I smiled. Sometimes the neighbors stop by with cookies or garden shears. I host brunch on Sundays. Nothing fancy, just eggs, toast, maybe some fruit. Women come from town, from nearby counties, from hours away. We sit around my small kitchen table and talk about everything. Money, grief, guilt, courage. We pass around stories like second helpings. Nobody's afraid to say, my daughter took my pension. Or, I never thought I'd be 70 and starting over. And nobody feels sorry for each other. That's the best part. Celeste hasn't reached out. She tried to file a defamation suit after the settlement, claiming I'd ruined their reputation in town. It didn't go far. My lawyer said, truth is the best defense. And that was the end of that. I heard she's started working part-time at a boutique, which I respect more than anything she's ever said to me. This afternoon, I'm speaking at a local community college, Financial Independence for Women Over 60. They asked me to title the talk. I called it, It's Still Yours, because it is. Your time, your name, your legacy. None of it belongs to the people who stop calling when you stop giving. After the talk, I'll come home, pour a glass of Pinot, and sit on my new deck, watching the sky burn orange over the water. I'll remember the years I spent waiting for someone to give me space, and I'll raise my glass to the woman who stopped waiting and took it instead. We don't tell this to judge, but to offer a moment of reflection. How many mothers are silently suffering inside their own homes? And truly, if it were you, in my place, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or speak up to reclaim your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts, because every story is a candle, lighting the way for someone else. God bless. And I believe courage leads us to better days. While you wait for those days, I've left 2 other stories on the screen. Our most beloved ones. I know they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying until the very end.